So in the second meditation, Descartes tells us that he is going to talk about the mind, what we can know from the mind, because, as he said in the first meditation, go back to the video if you have not seen it, in the first meditation he says that our senses are not reliable. We could be dreaming, we could be, today we would say in the Matrix, we perceive all kinds of things that don't exist. And so the only way to be certain is to rely on one's mind, because the mind is not so easy to trick as the senses. And now he goes there and says, okay, let's try to find out what is happening in the mind. He says, I shall nevertheless make an effort and follow anew the same path as that which I yesterday entered in the previous meditation. I shall proceed by setting aside all that in which the least doubt could be supposed to exist, just as if I had discovered that it was absolutely false. So he will discard all his senses, all his opinions, whatever is not absolutely certain. And since he talked about the deceiver, he talked about this evil genius which might be deceiving him. So now he uses this to find something about which he cannot be deceived. Listen to this. But there is some deceiver or other, very powerful and very cunning, whoever employs his ingenuity in deceiving me. Then without doubt I exist also if he deceives me. And let him deceive me as much as he will, he can never cause me to be nothing so long as I think that I am something. So that after having reflected well and carefully examined all things, we must come to the definite conclusion that this proposition, I am, I exist, is necessarily true each time that I pronounce it or that I mentally conceive it. So this is, of course, the core, right, of Descartes' philosophy. We talked about this already because the same or a similar sentence, not exactly the same, appears in the other book, in the Discourse on Method. But the point is, even if I am deceived, I cannot be deceived about the fact that I am deceived, right? Or that I feel that I exist, I feel that I think, and whether my thoughts are true or not, or deceived or genuine, does not really matter for the conclusion that since I have any thoughts, even if they are deceptions, I must be existing, because if I didn't exist, I wouldn't have any thoughts, right? And so this is here the point. And so I can be deceived about all kinds of things. I can be deceived about my body, I can be deceived about my senses, but I cannot be deceived about the fact that I exist. I am, Descartes says, however, a real thing and really exist. But what thing? I have answered, a thing which thinks. And now this is where we end up with this thought, because if I cannot trust my senses to tell me about my body, if I don't know if I even have fingers, or if I'm wearing a black t-shirt, or even if I have, a beard, or if I'm in this room, I cannot trust any of that. So these things are all not trustworthy. So then what can I know? I don't know anything about my body. I don't know anything about my environment. What is the thing that I can still know? And I don't know even my name, right? Perhaps my name is an illusion. So in the end, I don't even know if I'm human. I don't even know if I'm Andy. I don't know anything. So the only thing that I know is that something thinks, right? Something thinks. There is something that thinks. This I cannot doubt, but I don't know what it is. I don't know what properties it has. I may be deceived about anything else, but the fact that something thinks, this is certain. So this I think, therefore I am, you have to go back, perhaps I had a whole video about this recently, is that I don't know what the I is. I don't know who I think, therefore I am is. And here he corrects this a little bit. The right thing is not I think, therefore I am. What he wants to say is there is something that thinks. There is a mental state. And he clarifies it on the next page. He says, but then what am I? A thing which thinks. What is a thing which thinks? It's a thing which doubts, understands, conceives, affirms, denies, wills, refuses, and also imagines and feels. So it's not only thinking, right? You have all these other mental states of imagining, feeling, all the emotions you have. All these are also useful in the same sense to affirm your existence. So I think, therefore I am, I feel, therefore I am, I imagine, therefore I am. These are all more or less equivalent, because every mental state that I can, verify as having cannot be deceiving me about my existence. It makes my existence certain. The mental state itself may be deceptive, but not the fact that I have to exist in order to perceive the mental state. And now we come to one of the most famous examples that Descartes gives, one of the most famous discussions, which is the analogy of the piece of wax. And here's a piece of wax from a candle, right? And wax, when it melts, it becomes liquid. It becomes first soft, then liquid. It changes its smell, it changes perhaps its color. Today we have, of course, what we today perceive as wax is not really wax, it's some kind of artificial chemical thing. But if you have beeswax, this has a very strong smell that also, changes or becomes stronger when the thing melts. And so Descartes is playing with this piece of wax, and he says, okay, we play with this in our fingers while we touch it with the warmth of our fingers. This melts. I can hold it close to the fire. It will melt. In the beginning, it had the shape of a candle. It had perhaps, some pattern on it, but this melted away. And then in the end, I am just left with a little puddle of liquid. And if I now form this liquid again with my fingers, after a while I can touch it, I can form it into something new, I can make it into a ball, I can make it into a little cube, and it will be totally different from what it was before, right? The one thing was solid, it was a candle, it was a cylinder, it had a pattern. Now it has become liquid, then it has become a ball. So the shape has changed multiple times, the smell has changed, the way it feels has changed, the way it looks have changed. And how do I know that this is still the same piece of wax? Because this I cannot actually question, right? I would be a little bit crazy to say that this now is a different piece of wax. It's obviously the same, right? But how do I know that it is the same? And Descartes says, I cannot know it from my senses, because everything that my senses perceive has changed in between. And how do I know that it is the same? I know it only because of my mind. My mind knows that there is a continuity in the identity of this piece of wax, and that the piece I'm holding in my hand now is the same as the piece I had half an hour ago, although they have all these superficial properties that I can perceive with my senses that are different. But I know that it is the same, and I am right. It is the same. And my mind, which makes the judgment, I know that it is the same, is correct, while my senses are wrong. This is supposed to emphasize, again, the priority of the mind over the senses, and this is what makes Descartes a rationalist, the idea that our mind does not deceive us. Our senses can deceive us, our mind does not deceive us. And this is the basis of the whole rationalist project. Whenever later you have an empiricist saying that we should trust the senses, you could in principle go back and talk about the piece of wax of Descartes. And it has been used very often in this sense to justify the idea that only our mind has access to real truths, while our senses can be wrong about anything. Now, this is a very influential example, a very influential piece of thought, also because the piece of wax is something empirical. So what he does here is more than what you normally hear from rationalists, because when rationalist philosophers say our mind can access the real truths of the universe, they often speak about mathematics and geometry. They say, okay, a triangle has a sum of angles of 180 degrees or something like that. This is okay. This is an example of a rationalist knowledge that I cannot have from empirical sources. I cannot, really ever measure precisely the angles of a triangle, because no real triangle is precise enough. And so this kind of knowledge I get only from my mind. But the problem with this is that this is kind of analytical knowledge that is not really useful in everyday life. It does not relate to the outside world. This is a knowledge that I could have Even if I had no experience of the outside world ever, if I was, stuck in a spaceship, I've never seen the Earth, I've never seen anything, I can just see geometrical shapes, I'm stuck in a computer, let's say, and I could still work out this triangle thing. But what he does here with the wax is a little more interesting, because he says that I can confirm the identity of this piece of wax, but I can do it with my mind only. But what I'm doing, the conclusion I draw with my mind only, is actually a conclusion that pertains to the outside world. It is something empirical. It is this piece of wax I have in my hand. And although my senses deceive me about it, my mind is right about it. So here Descartes does something very important. He jumps out of this purely rationalist universe of, ideas in my mind, and says, my mind can even help me understand the outside world. It can even give me correct ideas about what's happening in the real world. And this is a very important step in rationalism. Otherwise, rationalism would be confined only to mental states. I can only know about, geometry and mathematics and all these abstract things that are true forever. They're purely ideas, but the mind could never tell me anything about the outside world. Then it would not be so useful, right? But now it is very useful, because actually it can confirm the identity of this piece of wax, which is an empirical thing. It is a thing of the outside world, right? And so this is why this wax experiment is so important to Descartes and also for the later history of philosophy. And with this, we have talked about the most important part of the second meditation. And now, if you want to continue with the third one, then click on the next video, where we will talk about meditation number 3 of Descartes. See you there. Bye-bye.